The moment they laughed at him, they guaranteed the truth would become impossible to ignore. 16-year-old Jaden Carter stood in the center of the gleaming lobby of Whitmore Industries with hundreds of eyes passing over him as though he did not belong there. The skyscraper towered above downtown Chicago, its glass walls reflecting the afternoon sun across polished marble floors. Executives hurried between meetings. Assistants carried tablets and coffee cups. Security guards watched quietly from a distance. Nobody paid much attention to the teenager wearing a faded hoodie and carrying an old backpack. At least not until he walked directly to the reception desk and calmly asked to speak with Ethan Whitmore. The receptionist looked up from her screen. "Do you have an appointment?" Jaden shook his head. "No, ma'am." "Then what is this regarding?" Jaden carefully removed an old smartphone from his backpack. The device was scratched and worn from years of use. "I need to tell Mr. Whitmore something about my father." The receptionist offered a polite smile. "You can leave a message." Jaden did not move. "My father saved this company." The words immediately changed the atmosphere. Nearby employees glanced toward him. A few exchanged amused looks. One executive actually laughed under his breath. The receptionist's smile faded into confusion. "Sir, if this is some kind of misunderstanding." "It is not." Jaden's voice remained calm. "I have proof." Within minutes, security was called. Not because Jaden was causing trouble. He was respectful and quiet. But in a building filled with billion-dollar decisions, nobody had time for stories from a teenager claiming his father had changed company history. As two guards approached, Jaden tightened his grip on the old phone. This was exactly what he expected. For nearly 3 years, he had carried the same evidence while nobody listened. Teachers dismissed him. Reporters ignored him. Former employees claimed he was chasing attention. But Jaden knew something they did not. His father never lied. The guard stopped beside him. "Come with us, son." Jaden nodded politely. "Okay." He began walking toward the revolving doors. Then something unexpected happened. The elevator at the far end of the lobby opened. Ethan Whitmore stepped out. The Billionaire founder moved through the building surrounded by advisors and executives. At 55 years old, he carried the confidence of a man who had built one of the most successful companies in America. Conversations immediately stopped as he crossed the lobby. Jaden saw his chance. Before the guards could escort him outside, he turned toward Ethan. "Mr. Whitmore." The Billionaire paused. Security stiffened instantly. Ethan looked at the teenager with mild curiosity. "Yes." Jaden held up the phone. "My father saved this company 15 years ago." A few employees laughed again. Ethan's expression hardened slightly. He had heard countless strange claims over the years. "And who was your father?" Jaden met his eyes without hesitation. "Marcus Carter." The name meant nothing to most people nearby. But for a fraction of a second, something flickered across Ethan Whitmore's face. A memory. A name he had not heard in years. Then the moment vanished. Ethan shook his head. "I think you are mistaken." Jaden looked down at the phone, then back at the Billionaire. "That is what everyone says before they see the video." The laughter faded almost immediately. Not because anyone believed Jaden Carter, but because of the confidence in his voice. 16 years old, standing in the middle of one of the most powerful corporate headquarters in America, he showed no sign of backing down. Ethan Whitmore studied the teenager carefully. Most people who approached him with extraordinary claims eventually became nervous. They stumbled over their words. They looked away. Jaden didn't either. The Billionaire glanced toward the old phone in the teenager's hand. "What video?" he asked. The question surprised everyone nearby. A few executives exchanged looks. Security stopped moving. Even the receptionist leaned forward slightly. Jaden lifted the phone. The screen was cracked in one corner. The battery cover had been taped years earlier. It looked like something that belonged in a drawer, not in the lobby of a billion-dollar company. "This belonged to my father," Jaden said. "He recorded something before he passed away." Ethan folded his arms. "And you believe whatever is on that phone proves your father saved my company?" Jaden nodded. "I know it does." The certainty in his answer created an uncomfortable silence. Ethan considered walking away. His schedule was packed. Investors were waiting upstairs. Board members were preparing for an afternoon meeting. Yet something about the name Marcus Carter continued bothering him. The memory remained frustratingly out of reach. Finally, Ethan sighed. "You have 60 seconds. Jaden immediately unlocked the device. The old screen flickered. A video file appeared. The recording quality was poor, clearly captured years earlier. Jaden pressed play. The lobby fell silent. On the screen appeared a man wearing a company identification badge. He sat alone inside what looked like a maintenance office. Behind him, several computer monitors displayed system alerts. The date stamp in the corner showed 15 years earlier. Ethan's expression changed slightly. He recognized the facility. It was one of Whitmore Industries' oldest data centers. The man on screen looked directly into the camera. "If anyone ever watches this," he began, "it means something happened before I could tell the truth myself." Ethan narrowed his eyes. The voice felt familiar. Very familiar. The recording continued. Marcus explained that he had discovered a major vulnerability hidden deep inside the company's infrastructure. According to the video, the weakness could have caused a catastrophic failure affecting millions of customer records. Marcus described how he reported the problem multiple times. He showed documents, internal tickets, technical reports. Yet nobody listened because of his position within the company. He was not an executive. He was not a manager. He was simply an employee. The video suddenly cut to images of archived reports and dated system logs. Several executives standing nearby shifted uncomfortably. Ethan's attention never left the screen. Then Marcus said something that changed everything. "If this system remains active after August 18th, the company will lose everything." Ethan felt his stomach tighten. August 18th. He knew that date. 15 years earlier, Whitmore Industries had experienced a mysterious systems event that almost disrupted major operations. The issue had been resolved unexpectedly overnight. Internal investigations never fully explained how. The video ended abruptly. The screen went dark. Nobody spoke. Ethan stared at the phone. The entire lobby seemed frozen. Finally, one senior executive cleared his throat. Anyone could fabricate something like this. Several others nodded immediately. Jaden expected that reaction. He had heard it countless times before. Calmly, he reached into his backpack and removed a worn envelope. "That is exactly why I brought the rest." Ethan looked down at the envelope. Across the front was an old Whitmore Industries company seal. And suddenly, the memory of Marcus Carter came rushing back. For several seconds, Ethan Whitmore could not take his eyes off the envelope. The faded company seal stamped across the front belonged to an older version of Whitmore Industries, one that had not existed for more than a decade. Very few people still had documents bearing that mark. Even fewer would have known how significant it was. The billionaire slowly stepped forward. Around him, executives, assistants, and security guards remained completely silent. The atmosphere in the lobby had shifted. What had started as an inconvenient interruption now felt like something entirely different. Jaden Carter carefully handed over the envelope. Ethan examined it closely. The paper showed signs of age. The corners were worn. The seal had yellowed slightly over time. Nothing about it looked recently created. "Where did you get this?" Ethan asked. "My father kept it in a locked box," Jaden replied. "After he passed away, my grandmother gave it to me." Ethan looked up. "Why wait until now?" Jaden's expression remained calm. "Because I spent years trying to understand what was inside before bringing it here." The billionaire nodded slowly. That answer sounded honest. Too honest to be rehearsed. Carefully, Ethan opened the envelope. Several documents slid into his hands. The first page immediately caught his attention. It was an internal commendation letter signed 15 years earlier. Ethan's own signature appeared at the bottom. His eyes widened slightly. He had no memory of signing it. The document praised Marcus Carter for identifying a critical infrastructure vulnerability and preventing a major operational failure. A few executives moved closer to see. One of them frowned immediately. "I have never seen that report before." Another executive shook his head. "Neither have I." Ethan continued reading. The next document contained technical summaries and incident timelines. Dates matched the period shown in the video. More importantly, they matched the mysterious event Ethan remembered from years earlier. At the time, a potentially devastating systems issue had been resolved overnight before it could affect customers. Internal reviews concluded the situation had somehow corrected itself. Looking back now, that explanation suddenly seemed impossible. Jaden stood quietly while the documents circulated among company leaders. He had experienced this moment before. First disbelief, then curiosity, then silence. The evidence always produced the same reaction. Finally, one senior executive looked directly at him. "If these papers are real, why was Marcus Carter never publicly recognized?" Jaden lowered his eyes briefly. That is exactly what I came here to find out. The question settled heavily across the lobby. Ethan felt it too. If Marcus had truly prevented a disaster, why had his contribution disappeared from company history? The billionaire continued sorting through the documents. Then he discovered something unexpected. Attached to the final report was a list of names. Employees who reviewed the incident. Managers who approved recommendations. Supervisors who signed off on the investigation. One name immediately stood out. Ethan recognized it instantly. Daniel Mercer. 15 years earlier, Mercer had served as a senior executive overseeing the division involved in the incident. He had retired several years ago. Ethan stared at the signature for a long moment. A memory surfaced. Not of Marcus. Of Mercer. The executive had strongly opposed reopening the investigation after the event occurred. At the time, Ethan assumed Mercer wanted to move forward and avoid unnecessary delays. Now that decision suddenly seemed much more important. Ethan slowly looked up at Jaden. Did your father ever mention Daniel Mercer? Jaden nodded immediately. Yes. The answer came so quickly that several executives exchanged nervous glances. Ethan's expression hardened. What did he say? Jaden reached into his backpack once more and removed a small notebook. The cover was worn from years of use. My father wrote everything down, he said quietly. And Daniel Mercer appears on almost every page. The notebook felt surprisingly heavy in Ethan Whitmore's hands. Not because of its size, but because of what it might contain. The billionaire glanced around the lobby. The board meeting upstairs had been forgotten. The executives who had once dismissed Jaden Carter now stood silently, waiting to hear what came next. Jaden watched as Ethan carefully opened the worn cover. Inside, every page was filled with neat handwriting. Dates, names, technical observations, personal notes. Marcus Carter had documented everything. Ethan flipped through several pages. The entries stretched across months. What immediately caught his attention was how often one name appeared. Daniel Mercer. Again and again. Sometimes mentioned briefly. Sometimes filling entire pages. Ethan's jaw tightened. 15 years earlier, Mercer had been one of the most influential executives in the company. He controlled budgets, projects, and internal investigations. Few employees challenged his decisions. Marcus apparently had. Ethan continued reading. One entry described a meeting where Marcus presented evidence of the vulnerability he discovered. Another described repeated attempts to escalate concerns through proper channels. Every report appeared professional, detailed, responsible. Yet according to the notes, each warning was delayed or ignored. Several executives gathered closer. One of them quietly asked, "Are those authentic?" Ethan did not answer immediately. The handwriting appeared consistent. The dates aligned with company records already shown in the documents. Nothing looked fabricated. Then he reached a page that made him stop. The entry described a conversation between Marcus and Daniel Mercer only days before the systems event occurred. Marcus wrote that Mercer instructed him to stop raising concerns because further investigation would create unnecessary panic and financial risk. Ethan frowned. That was not simply poor judgment. That was a decision that could have placed the company in danger. Jaden stood calmly while the room absorbed the information. He had read the notebook many times. Every page strengthened his belief that his father had tried to do the right thing. Yet nobody had listened. Ethan turned another page. Attached to it was a photocopy of an internal email. The sender was Daniel Mercer. The recipient list included several senior leaders from that time period. The subject line referenced the exact vulnerability Marcus had described. The email proved Mercer knew about the problem weeks before the crisis. Ethan felt a knot form in his stomach. The evidence was becoming harder to dismiss. This cannot stay in the lobby, he said finally. The billionaire closed the notebook and looked directly at Jaden. Come with me. Moments later, they entered a private executive conference room overlooking Chicago. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the skyline as Ethan placed the notebook, documents, and phone on the large table. A small team of legal advisors and company historians joined them. Ethan wanted answers. Real answers. For the next 2 hours, every document was examined. Dates were cross-checked. Signatures were verified. Archived records were retrieved. With each confirmation, the room grew quieter. Nobody wanted to say it aloud yet. Then one company historian opened an old personnel database and found something unexpected. Marcus Carter's employee file contained a special notation entered 3 days after the crisis had been resolved. Ethan leaned forward. "What does it say?" The historian stared at the screen. His expression changed immediately. "Sir," he said quietly, "according to this record, Marcus Carter was supposed to receive a company-wide commendation and public recognition." The room fell silent. Ethan looked at Jaden. Jaden looked back at him. The historian swallowed hard before continuing. "But the commendation was canceled by executive order." Ethan already knew whose name he expected to see. Still, hearing it felt different. The historian pointed to the authorization line, signed by Daniel Mercer. The conference room remained silent long after the historian spoke the name. Daniel Mercer. Every person seated around the table understood what the discovery meant. Marcus Carter had not simply been overlooked. Someone had actively prevented him from receiving recognition. Ethan Whitmore slowly leaned back in his chair and stared through the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Chicago. 15 years earlier, he trusted his senior executives to handle situations like this. Now he was beginning to question how much he truly knew about what happened inside his own company. Across the table, Jaden Carter remained calm. He did not look surprised. In many ways, he had been expecting this moment. For years he had studied his father's notes, trying to understand why someone who appeared to save a major company had disappeared from its history. Now the first real answers were emerging. Ethan turned back toward the historian. "Pull every archived file connected to Mercer and the systems incident." The historian nodded immediately. Several legal advisors began making calls. Within minutes, additional records started appearing on screens throughout the room. The investigation was no longer informal. It had become official. As documents arrived, a troubling pattern emerged. Multiple reports written by Marcus had been downgraded, delayed, or reassigned before reaching senior leadership. Important recommendations had disappeared from distribution lists. Follow-up meetings had been canceled without explanation. None of it proved malicious intent. But together, the pattern raised serious questions. Then a legal advisor discovered something unexpected. "You need to see this." Everyone turned toward her screen. A scanned memorandum appeared. The document had been created 1 week after the crisis was resolved. Ethan immediately recognized the formatting. Internal executive correspondence. The memo summarized who should receive credit for preventing the incident. 3 names appeared. None belonged to Marcus Carter. Ethan felt his jaw tighten. Who approved that? The advisor zoomed in on the signature block. Daniel Mercer. Jaden lowered his eyes briefly. Every new discovery confirmed what his father had written years earlier. Yet he felt no satisfaction, only sadness. Marcus Carter never wanted fame. He only wanted the truth recorded accurately. Ethan looked toward the teenager. "Why keep pushing this?" he asked quietly. "Most people would have given up years ago." Jaden thought for a moment before answering. "Because my father never stopped believing the truth mattered." The room grew still again. Ethan nodded slowly. He respected that answer, more than he expected. A few minutes later, one of the researchers reviewing archived personnel records raised his hand. "There is something else." He projected a newly recovered file onto the main screen. It contained employee evaluations written shortly before Marcus left the company. Ethan scanned the pages. The technical ratings were exceptional. The recommendations were strong. Then he reached the final comment section, written by Marcus himself. The billionaire read the sentence silently. Then he read it again. Finally, he looked up. "Listen to this." The room turned toward him. Ethan read the words aloud. "I do not need recognition. I only hope the company remains honest enough to remember what really happened." Nobody spoke after that. The sentence felt almost prophetic. 15 years later, his son was sitting in the very company Marcus had tried to protect. Ethan closed the file and looked directly at Jaden. For the first time since their meeting began, there was no skepticism in his eyes, only respect. Then the conference room door opened. An assistant hurried inside carrying a tablet. Her expression suggested urgency. "Sir," she said, "you need to see what is happening online." Ethan took the device and stared at the screen. His eyes widened immediately. Somehow, footage from the lobby encounter had leaked. And in less than 3 hours, millions of people were already watching. The tablet screen illuminated the conference room with a glow that immediately drew everyone's attention. Ethan Whitmore stared at the numbers climbing in real time. Hundreds of thousands of views. Then millions. The video showing Jaden Carter standing alone in the company lobby had spread far beyond Chicago. People across the country were sharing it, commenting on it, debating it. The clip captured the exact moment a teenager claimed his father had saved one of America's most successful companies, and nobody believed him. Ethan watched silently as public reactions flooded the screen. Some defended the company. Others defended Jayden. Many simply wanted answers. What surprised Ethan most was how quickly people connected with the teenager's determination. Jayden had not shouted. He had not demanded money. He had not created a scene. He had simply stood his ground and asked for the truth. That quiet confidence resonated with millions. One legal advisor looked concerned. This is becoming a public relations issue. Ethan immediately shook his head. No. His voice was firm. This is becoming a truth issue. The room fell silent. For the first time, nobody viewed Jayden as an inconvenience. He had become the center of a story far larger than anyone anticipated. Across social media platforms, former employees began sharing their own memories. Some remembered Marcus Carter. Others recalled hearing rumors about the system's incident years ago. A retired engineer posted a message saying Marcus was one of the most talented people he had ever worked with. Another former employee shared an archived company newsletter mentioning Marcus's contributions shortly before the recognition mysteriously disappeared. Every hour seemed to uncover another piece of the puzzle. Jayden sat quietly at the end of the conference table, watching events unfold. The attention made him uncomfortable. He never wanted fame. He only wanted people to know who his father truly was. Ethan noticed the teenager's discomfort. "How are you holding up?" he asked. Jayden shrugged slightly. "I am okay." Then he smiled faintly. "My grandmother is probably watching all of this." The thought made Ethan smile as well. For the first time all day, the tension in the room softened. Then another message arrived from the investigative team reviewing historical records. The lead researcher requested an immediate video conference. Moments later, his face appeared on the main screen. He looked excited. "We found something." Ethan leaned forward. "What?" The researcher shared several newly recovered files from an off-site archive. The documents had not appeared in earlier searches because they were stored under an outdated classification system. One file contained correspondence between Daniel Mercer and several executives during the weeks surrounding the incident. Another contained internal recommendations. Then a third document appeared. The room immediately went silent. It was a recommendation for the company's highest internal service award. The nominee listed at the top was Marcus Carter. Ethan stared at the screen. The recommendation described Marcus's actions in extraordinary detail. According to the report, his work not only prevented operational failure, but also protected millions of customers and saved the company hundreds of millions of dollars. "This changes everything," one advisor whispered. Ethan nodded slowly. "It did." The researcher continued. "There is more." He opened another file. Attached to the award recommendation was a handwritten note from Daniel Mercer. The note requested that the nomination be withdrawn immediately. No explanation. No justification. Just a direct order. Ethan felt disbelief wash over him. Marcus had not simply been forgotten. He had been erased. Then the researcher hesitated. "There is one final item." He displayed a file that nobody in the room had seen before. The title alone made Ethan's heart race. Recorded Statement of Marcus Carter. Dated 2 days before he left the company. The conference room lights reflected across the screen as everyone stared at the newly discovered file. Recorded Statement of Marcus Carter. Even the title seemed impossible. For years, nobody knew this recording existed. Yet now it sat in front of them like the final piece of a puzzle that had remained unfinished for 15 years. Ethan Whitmore leaned forward. Across the internet, millions of people continued discussing the story. News outlets had begun requesting comments. Former employees were sharing memories. The pressure was growing by the hour. But inside the conference room, none of that mattered. Only the truth mattered. "Play it," Ethan said quietly. The researcher nodded and opened the file. The video began. The image quality was better than the footage stored on Jayden's old phone. Marcus Carter appeared seated inside a company office. He looked calm, professional, focused. There was no sign of anger in his face. No bitterness. Only determination. The date stamp confirmed the recording had been made 2 days before he left Whitmore Industries. The room became silent as Marcus began speaking. "If this recording is ever reviewed, I want the facts preserved accurately." Ethan immediately noticed something. Marcus was not trying to defend himself. He was documenting events. The same careful, methodical approach visible throughout his notes and reports. Marcus explained how he discovered the infrastructure vulnerability. He described the steps he took to report it. He listed meetings, timelines, and recommendations. Every statement matched the evidence already uncovered. Then he addressed the question that had haunted everyone. Why did he leave? Marcus paused before answering. I was told that continuing to pursue recognition for this work would create unnecessary conflict. Several people in the room exchanged looks. The wording was careful, but the meaning was clear. Marcus continued. Recognition is not important to me. Protecting customers is important. Protecting the company is important. Jaden listened quietly. Hearing his father's voice fill the room felt surreal. Some parts sounded familiar. Others he had never heard before. Then Marcus smiled slightly. The expression transformed the atmosphere. One day my son may see this. Jaden froze. Every eye in the room shifted toward him. Marcus continued speaking directly into the camera. If that happens, I want him to know something. Never measure your value by who gives you credit. Measure your value by whether you did the right thing when it mattered. Silence followed the sentence. Even the legal advisors stopped taking notes. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. Marcus had every reason to be resentful. Yet the message contained none of it. Only integrity. Then the recording reached its final minutes. Marcus opened a folder and held up several documents. Everything I discovered is here. He placed them back on the desk. The truth has a way of surviving. Ethan lowered his eyes. The words felt almost prophetic. 15 years later, the truth had survived. Not because executives preserved it. Not because corporate systems protected it. Because a teenager refused to stop searching. The video ended. Nobody spoke for several moments. Finally, Ethan looked at Jaden. Your father was an extraordinary man. Jaden nodded quietly. I know. Then another notification appeared on the conference room screen. The story had reached national television. Major networks were now covering the investigation. The public wanted answers. More importantly, they wanted accountability. Ethan understood what had to happen next. He stood from his chair and looked around the room. Prepare a public statement. The advisors immediately began moving. But Ethan was not finished. He turned toward Jaden. There is something everyone deserves to hear. Jaden frowned slightly. What? Ethan looked toward the city skyline beyond the windows. Then back at the teenager. I think we finally know why Daniel Mercer tried so hard to bury your father's name. The conference room remained quiet after Ethan Whitmore spoke those words. For hours, everyone had focused on proving Marcus Carter was telling the truth. Now a different question stood at the center of the investigation. Why would Daniel Mercer work so hard to erase him from company history? Ethan walked toward the main display screen where recovered documents still covered multiple windows. Years of records, emails, personnel reports, meeting summaries. The deeper investigators looked, the clearer the pattern became. Daniel Mercer had not simply disagreed with Marcus. He had systematically removed references to his contributions whenever possible. Jaden Carter watched from the end of the table. Throughout the day, he had imagined many outcomes. He expected resistance. He expected skepticism. What he never expected was to uncover evidence suggesting his father's recognition had been intentionally buried. One of the researchers cleared his throat. We think we know what happened. Everyone turned toward him. The researcher opened another recovered file. This one contained financial projections from 15 years earlier. Ethan immediately recognized the documents. They were tied to one of the company's largest expansion projects. The same project operating during the systems incident Marcus discovered. The researcher highlighted several sections. According to these reports, if Marcus's warnings had become public immediately, the expansion would have been delayed. Ethan understood instantly. Delays would have affected investor confidence. Executive performance reviews. Major contracts. Millions of dollars were connected to project timelines. The researcher continued. Daniel Mercer was personally overseeing the expansion. The room grew still. Another advisor opened a related file. Internal correspondence showed Mercer repeatedly emphasizing speed and deadlines during that period. Safety reviews were considered obstacles. Additional investigations were considered costly. None of it proved bad intentions, but it explained motive. Then a legal advisor found something even more significant. An archived executive evaluation completed shortly after the crisis ended. Ethan read the document carefully. Daniel Mercer had received a major promotion that year. The evaluation specifically praised his leadership during the successful expansion project. Ethan slowly lowered the paper. Everything suddenly fit together. If Marcus received public recognition, questions would have followed. Questions about why his warnings were initially ignored. Questions about management decisions. Questions that might have complicated Mercer's promotion and reputation. Jaden sat quietly, absorbing the information. He felt sadness more than anger. His father spent years doing the right thing. Yet someone else's career mattered more than the truth. Ethan looked across the table at him. Your father protected this company. Jaden nodded. He always believed protecting people was more important than protecting himself. Ethan glanced toward the city skyline outside the windows. The statement reminded him of the final video message. Never measure your value by who gives you credit. The words echoed in his mind. Then another notification appeared on the main screen. News coverage had expanded nationwide. Television networks were replaying footage of Jaden standing in the lobby. Millions of people were now discussing Marcus Carter. Former employees continued sharing stories. Customers expressed support. The public was demanding transparency. One advisor looked at Ethan. The entire country is watching. Ethan nodded. Then they deserve the truth. He made a decision in that moment. No carefully worded statement. No corporate press release. No attempt to minimize what happened. The company would tell the complete story. A national press conference was scheduled for the following morning. Every recovered document would be reviewed overnight. Every fact would be verified. Every question would be answered. As the meeting concluded, Ethan approached Jaden privately. There is something I need you to know. Jaden looked up. Ethan's expression was sincere. Tomorrow is not about saving the company's reputation. He paused briefly. Tomorrow is about restoring your father's. Then Ethan reached into the investigation file and removed one final document nobody had examined yet. The label across the top immediately caught his attention. Personal letter from Marcus Carter. Not intended for company records. The following morning, every seat inside Whitmore Industries' main auditorium was filled. Journalists lined the back walls. Television cameras pointed toward the stage. Millions more watched through live broadcasts across the country. What began as a teenager walking into a company lobby had become a national conversation about truth, integrity, and recognition. Ethan Whitmore stood behind the podium, reviewing the final pages of evidence one last time. Nearby sat Jaden Carter, dressed neatly but still carrying the same worn backpack that had accompanied him from the beginning. Despite the attention surrounding him, he looked exactly the same. Calm, humble, focused. The room quieted as Ethan approached the microphone. He spent nearly an hour presenting the findings. Documents appeared on giant screens. Internal reports were verified. Archived records were explained. The timeline became undeniable. Marcus Carter had discovered the vulnerability. Marcus Carter had repeatedly warned leadership. Marcus Carter had prevented a crisis. And Marcus Carter had never received the recognition he earned. When Ethan finished, the audience remained silent for several seconds. The weight of the story settled over everyone. Then Ethan reached for the final document. The personal letter discovered the night before. There is one last thing, he said. A letter written by Marcus Carter that was never intended for company records. Jaden looked up. He had never seen the letter either. Ethan carefully unfolded the page and began reading aloud. The message was addressed to no specific person. It simply recorded Marcus's thoughts about responsibility, honesty, and service. Then Ethan reached the final paragraph. His voice softened. If someday the truth becomes known, I hope nobody spends energy feeling sorry for me. Instead, spend that energy helping the next person who does the right thing without expecting a reward. That would mean far more than any title or ceremony. The auditorium fell completely silent. Several reporters lowered their cameras. Others wiped away tears. Marcus had waited 15 years to be heard, and when his voice finally reached the world, it carried no bitterness at all. Ethan folded the letter and looked toward Jaden. Your father was right. Then the billionaire stepped away from the podium and revealed a large display covered by a curtain. As the curtain fell, a new plaque appeared. Marcus Carter Innovation and Integrity Scholarship. The program would provide opportunities for students across the country who demonstrated character, perseverance, and service to others. The audience rose to its feet. Applause filled the auditorium. Jaden sat motionless for a moment, overwhelmed by emotions he could hardly describe. He had come seeking acknowledgement for his father. He never expected something this large. Ethan walked over and extended his hand. Jaden accepted it. The cameras captured the moment instantly. Hours later, the image appeared everywhere. Yet what spread fastest was not the handshake. It was Marcus's message. Across social media, schools, businesses, and communities shared his words. Millions of people discovered the story of a man who chose integrity over recognition and a son who refused to let the truth disappear. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Ethan looked at Jaden and smiled. "You came here to restore your father's name." Jaden smiled back. "And we did." For the first time since entering the building, nobody doubted him anymore.